A slight hysterical tendency, performing diagnosis in Charlotte Perkins Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper by Vivian Deschamps is an academic article that dissects the diagnostic process and how diagnoses are essentially a performance for both a patient and the professional. It highlights Gilman's personal experience suffering from depression, and it also criticizes doctors, the healthcare system, the diagnostic process, more specifically with regards to hysteria, its impacts, the so-called rest cure, and how it's represented, particularly in this short story.
In this article, Deschamps argues the contrast of both the desire for and the rejection of the hysteria diagnosis. Additionally, she suggests that they can be harmful. Furthermore, this article explores the diagnostic process and how it can be contradictory. This essentially means that it identifies an issue. However, this does not necessarily apply to the case in this particular story, seeing as the diagnosis was made up. Moreover, Deschamps explains how diagnoses do not always alter or correct disorders or mental illnesses. Now, for context, The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman was published very shortly after hysteria became a fashionable disease. Hysteria is knowingly difficult to define and hard to diagnose. Additionally, doctors would take advantage of those who would self-diagnose by prescribing them with alcohol and cocaine as a regimen. Furthermore, Deschamps expresses how Gilman was one of those women who self-diagnosed after experiencing numerous symptoms after childbirth. Fundamentally, Gilman was put on the rest cure, which basically makes her story of the yellow wallpaper autobiographical. Additionally, Deschamps explains how Gilman wrote this story while enduring the rest cure. In terms of performativity in The Yellow Wallpaper, Deschamps indicates that a diagnosis for hysteria is not just a form of identification, as a means to give women's symptoms a title, but rather a certain performance was anticipated of the women. Additionally, it demonstrates how administering a diagnosis was a form of authoritative performance for physicians. The article also argues that Gilman trusted herself more than she trusted her husband, who was a physician. This is because the article demonstrates how the narrator of the story believed in her own opinions through Jane's character writing in her journal. Additionally, Deschamps exhibits that the narrator self-diagnoses after explaining her symptoms to her husband, who refuses to admit that she's sick, through means of integrating this quote. He scoffs openly at any talk of things felt and not seen. You see, he does not believe that I am sick. What can one do? With all of that said, although Gilman is not exactly her fictional character, her story still reflects her loss of trust in physicians and doctors, all of which is performed in The Yellow Wallpaper. The narrator goes through one of the typical routes of women diagnosed with hysteria in this time period. However, it is finally told through the perspective of a woman.
So, when we look at hysteria and the rest cure, we can see that this article states that Gilman's intentions of writing the story of the yellow wallpaper was, in fact, to prevent the wrongful diagnosis of hysteria in women. However, as women read her story, they would self-diagnose with hysteria, ultimately diminishing her goal. Nevertheless, as these women read her story, they would realize the harmful ramifications of the rest cure. So, even though the story didn't necessarily accomplish what she wanted, it still did some good for those women. Deschamps also notes that the story doesn't offer a solution or cure for hysteria. However, it aimed to illustrate how hysteria can be thought-provoking and essentially a good source of inspiration for literature. And the article also states that the story succeeded in the reduction of the rest cure, which is a good thing. She also suggests that the rest cure demonstrates that male physicians and doctors often didn't trust women and their reports on their own health status and how they felt. Moreover, the creation of the rest cure was based on the notion that women were entering the workforce, and according to Dr. Mitchell, women who worked became hysterical. Now, regarding agency, this article suggests that the rest cure takes away one's sense of self, one's sense of power over themselves, essentially their sense of agency. Also, throughout this article, it's implied that women's autonomy is essentially stripped away from them when they are diagnosed with hysteria by men and male physicians. The rescuer especially, seeing as how they are forced to remain immobile and stay paralyzed in bed for weeks, if not months on end. Delchamps also breaks down diagnoses as a form of patriarchal dominance. So basically, to sum up everything that has been stated and everything that we've talked about, defending what this article has argued and its main points and arguments, what it's trying to dissect in the story of the yellow wallpaper, is that it supplies an enlightening and interpretive composition as a means to comprehend issues regarding gender that are relevant to modern day debates in disability studies. So it also tested patriarchal and masculinized performances of the medical diagnostic process as well as treatment by resisting the ideology cure.
It is so hard to talk with John about my case, because he is so wise, and because he loves me so. But I tried it last night. It was moonlight. The moon shines in all around just as the sun does. I hate to see it sometimes. It creeps so slowly and always comes in by one window or another. John was asleep, and I hated to waken him, so I kept still and watched the moonlight on the undulating wallpaper till I felt creepy. The faint figure behind seemed to shake the pattern, just as if she wanted to get out.
What is it, little girl? Don't go walking about like that. You'll get cold.
I thought it was a good time to talk, so I told him that I really was not gaining here, and that I wished he would take me away.
Why, darling, our lease will be up in 3 weeks, and I can't see how to leave before. The repairs are not done at home, and I could not possibly leave town just now. Of course, if you were in any danger, I could and would, but you really are better, dear, whether you can see it or not. I am a doctor, dear, and I know. You are gaining flesh and color, your appetite is better. I feel really much easier about you.
I don't weigh a bit more, nor as much, and my appetite might be better in the evenings when you are here, but it is worse in the mornings when you are away.
Bless her little heart. She shall be as sick as she pleases. But now let's improve the shining hours by going to sleep and talk about it in the morning.
And you won't go away?
Why, how can I, dear? It is only 3 weeks more, and then we will take a nice little trip of a few days while Jenny's getting the house ready. Really, dear, you are better.
Better in body, perhaps.
My darling, I beg of you, for my sake, for our child's sake, as well as for your own, that you will never for one instant let the idea enter your mind. There is nothing so dangerous, so fascinating, to a temperament like yours. It is a false and foolish fancy. Can you not trust me as a physician when I tell you so?
So, of course, I said no more on that score, and we went to sleep before long. He thought I was asleep at first, but I wasn't. I lay there for hours, trying to decide whether that front pattern and the back pattern really did move together or separately.